The Elegance coral holds a special place in my heart. Way back when I first started the hobby, the Elegance immediately grabbed my attention and became an aspirational piece that I just had to have in my reef. I loved everything about it. The striping on the body of the coral looked iridescent when it caught the light just right. Its motion was graceful and relaxing. It was like an anemone with its long flowing tentacles, yet was still a stony coral, so I didn't have to worry about it roaming around the tank stinging everything. To this day, the Elegance remains one of my favorite large polyp stony corals. Nostalgia aside, let's get into the deeper profile of this amazing coral. How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another coral spotlight here at Tidal Gardens. This one is all about Catalaphyllia jardinei, aka the Elegance coral. If you're new to this channel and like these coral spotlights, I invite you to join the community by hitting the subscribe button and then hitting the real subscribe button, which is that notification bell. We have many more videos like this planned, and this is the best way to stay up to date on all of our new posts. Anyhow, without further ado, let's talk about elegances. Elegance corals are found throughout the Pacific Ocean. In the past, these corals were harvested from Indonesia. However, most of the ones in the hobby these days originate from Australia. Where the specimen originated was a major concern because there was a stark difference in their survivability of elegances collected from Australia versus Indonesia. That wasn't always the case. Several years ago, an Indonesian elegance coral was an ideal beginner's coral. It required moderate lighting, readily accepted feeding, and was hardy beyond compare. I remember a particular specimen that I owned that accidentally got caught in the suction of a powerhead. The very next day, it was fully extended and looked no worse for wear. Then something changed. Indonesian elegances suddenly became extremely sensitive and were susceptible to infection. They would get this cotton-like buildup and then retract before invariably perishing. Worse yet, the infection would spread to other elegances, even the non-Indonesian ones. For years we stopped purchasing elegance corals, and it was only when elegance corals became available from Australia that we resumed carrying them at our store. The Australian elegances for the most part have done really well for us. If you're currently shopping for an elegance for your aquarium, and you're concerned about its place of origin, I wouldn't worry about it too much. On one hand, it's very difficult to tell where one comes from just by looking at it. Elegance corals have subtle variations, and there's a great deal of aesthetic overlap between individuals from Indonesia versus the individuals from Australia. Having said that, there's a very good chance that it's Australian. At the time of this recording, there has been an export ban in effect from Indonesia for close to a year. That really only leaves Australia, although I suppose it's possible that there's a tiny fraction of Indonesian elegance corals still circulating in the trade. If that happens to change in the future, really the only way to tell is to ask the seller about the origin, and hopefully they will have some idea of where it was imported from. Now that we've covered some background on elegance corals, let's go over some care tips. First, let's cover the topic of lighting. Elegance corals are not so particular about the lighting as they're both adaptable to many types of lighting and tend to remain very consistent in appearance despite the lighting provided. We've kept them in low light, let's say right around 50 par, and in brighter aquariums around 150 par without any noticeable differences in growth or coloration. Now I recommend moderate lighting levels around 100 par just to be safe, But like I said, there's plenty of leeway here. The main concern is to avoid shocking a new addition with too much light right away. This is true for pretty much all newly added corals. Far more damage is done by that initial overexposure to light rather than too little light. If you have a particularly high intensity lighted tank, let's say with an average of 200 plus par, you can still get an Elegance. Just take the requisite steps to allow the coral to slowly adapt to those lighting conditions. If you see it start to fade or worse yet bleach, find a spot under an overhang low in the tank or a spot off axis from the main source of light where the intensity tends to be lower. In terms of fluorescence, Elegance corals do fluoresce quite a bit. Under full actinic lights, their bodies glow a mix of blue and green, while the tips of their tentacles glow a color depending on what color morph you have. So some have pink tips, purple tips, green tips, and in rare circumstances, yellow tips. Every now and again, there are really rare color morphs that incorporate reds and blacks, but for many of these I've only seen pictures, never one in person, and I don't know, I've probably seen over 100,000 of them, so if they're out there, they are indeed very rare. Next, let's talk briefly about water chemistry. Elegance corals are LPS, meaning as stony corals, they require consistent levels of calcium, alkalinity, and to a lesser degree magnesium in order to grow their calcium carbonate skeleton. If your stony coral load is low, or an Elegance coral is one of the only stony corals in your tank, I wouldn't worry too much about these levels. And the reason I say that is the amount of supplementation needed to maintain calcium, alkalinity, and magnesium depends a lot on the size and growth rate of the stony corals in the tank. Although Elegance corals can grow to massive sizes, the amount of skeleton they produce is surprisingly small compared to the amount of flesh that they can pack on. I've seen some Elegance corals extend over a foot in length, with only a small, tiny, 4-inch skeleton below. Agonizing over these levels might be mental overkill for this coral, but it's good to periodically test just to make sure that everything is in the ballpark of natural seawater levels. A couple of parameters worth paying closer attention to is nitrate and phosphate. LPS corals are sensitive to declining water quality, and elevated levels of nitrate and phosphate are an indicator of declining water quality. Low nitrate levels around about 5 to 10 parts per million are actually welcome for these large polyp stony corals. But around 30 to 40 parts per million of nitrate, and you might start running into some issues, such as tissue recession. In extreme cases, you might see an Elegance go through full-fledged polyp bailout. I made a video all about polyp bailout, which you can check out if you want to learn more about that topic. If you find your tank has elevated nitrates or phosphates, I look to up nutrient removal through more aggressive protein skimming, detritus removal, and more frequent water changes. Limiting nutrient import is another technique that may work, but I tend to focus on removal rather than lowering input. But that's a decision that you're going to have to make in the context of your own system. Different systems will respond differently depending on a multitude of factors, from system size to filtration capacity to bioprocessing capabilities. Again, your mileage may vary. Elegance corals are photosynthetic, much like most corals in the reef aquarium hobby. So long as this coral is provided adequate lighting, it will get most of the nutrition that it requires from the zooxanthellae dinoflagellates living in its tissue. In our experience, however, they also benefit from direct feeding. There are a variety of frozen fish foods available that make outstanding meals for Elegances. We like to feed a mixture of meaty foods such as shrimp, fish, and squid. As a side note, this coral is an adept assassin of snails. Be forewarned, if you like snails in your tank, this coral may completely remove them from the equation. Let's move on to water flow. We've kept elegances under a variety of flow conditions ranging from very little movement to almost crashing waves. Elegance corals appear to be less affected by their flow conditions. However, stronger flow was beneficial in bringing more food to the coral tentacles. Like light, water flow is not something that I would go crazy with. Just go with something middle of the road. The issue with too much water flow is that the coral tends to be kind of top heavy, and especially when they get larger and they start to swell up, the risk there is that they can start to parachute off of the perch high on the rockscape and fall on corals below. A quick note about propagation. At this time, elegance corals are not a great candidate for aquaculture. It's possible to cut them with a bandsaw. However, this is risky as you may lose one or both of the halves. It's something that we almost never do here at Tidal Gardens. It was just never worth it in my experience. Sometimes these corals come in cut from overseas because oftentimes they're very large colonies found on the reefs, and collectors can make quite a bit more money cutting them into quote-unquote hobby-sized pieces. And in this case, although the flesh is completely healed, I find that elegance corals cut in this way long-term are more sensitive than smaller specimens that have uncut skeletons, if that makes sense. Now, another technique altogether is to grow a colony to a very large size and wait for buds to appear at the base. Once the buds get larger, they can be removed and then remounted. This may be the better technique, but it doesn't happen quickly at all. And I've personally only seen an elegance do this once. It's not like branching frog spawn where buds are produced relatively quickly on each stalk. No, this elegance was gigantic. It was probably the size of like a small puppy. So it probably takes years and years before an elegance grows mature enough to start to bud like that. That pretty much does it for elegance corals. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you would like more information or perhaps purchase an elegance coral for your home aquarium, I invite you to visit us at tidalgardens.com and see what we have in stock. As always, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to really do us a solid, please share this video with a friend who might be interested in elegance corals. You know that YouTube algorithm loves those juicy shares. Anyhow, I'll see you all next time. Happy reefing. So long as this coral is provided adequate lighting, it will get most of the So long as this coral is provided adequate lighting, it will get most of the nutrition that it requires from the zooxanthellae. It will get most of the nutrition it requires. Oh my god, why can't I say this line?